Speaker, I agree with the majority view in the Senate, and I support the member for Melbourne's motion that would see this place, or those of us in this place, agree with the message from the Senate. Look, it is self-evident that the situation on Manus Island is dire. There's now been an abundance of media reports, an abundance of reports from witnesses firsthand who have seen the conditions on Manus Island, have seen the way in which hundreds of men, many of whom have already been found to be refugees, are living in squalid conditions. And, Speaker, I simply do not accept the words from the minister when he says that all is well there, because the fact is there are just too many witnesses. There are too many reports from people who are saying the situation is dire. Hundreds of men living in squalid conditions, many in fear of their life. That we would allow this to continue, Speaker, is inhuman. That we would refuse a generous offer from the government of New Zealand to voluntarily resettle at least some of those men, that we would refuse that offer is inhuman. I mean, it's time for the government to swallow its pride. I simply do not accept that the resettlement of 150 men in New Zealand needs to be a fast-track pathway to this country. It need not be that way. The fact is the government needs to swallow its pride and act in accordance with the majority view of the Senate and, near on, the majority view in this place. Perhaps the majority view in this place, if there was to be a conscience vote on this issue. The fact is that we as a country need to have a legal and an ethical response to people who are fleeing for their life. And let's not forget, Speaker, that most people who come to this country claiming to be fleeing for their life are found to have been fleeing for their life. So what's so hard about this country starting to act like the law-abiding and rich and fortunate and ethical country that we would like to think we are? What's so hard for us about acting ethically and legally? Why can't we start honouring the commitments we've made in any number of international agreements? Agreements like the Refugee Convention, agreements like the Rome Statute, international agreements that when we signed up to them, we did so because we thought they mattered. But they don't seem to matter now because we have a government who is more inclined to pander to the xenophobia and to the racism in this community in the race to the bottom of the barrel. And while I'm very heartened and pleased that the opposition, the Labor Party, is supportive of the motion by the member for Melbourne, I also call on the opposition to lift your game too. The fact is there should be no place for mandatory detention. There should be no place for offshore processing. There should be no place for any sort of temporary visa. There should be no place for the towback of boats to countries like Indonesia. What there should be is an intelligent, a legal and an ethical response, so that when people come to our shore by any means, by air or by boat, and if they claim to be fleeing for their life, we should give them protection. We should hear their claim, and we should give them permanent refuge if their claim is found to be accurate. That's what we should be doing. And if there are people in this community who don't like that legal and ethical response, it's our job in this place to start acting like leaders and to explain to the broad Australian community why we need to act in accordance with international law, why we need to act like a fortunate and a rich and a lucky country, one with morals and scruples. Because it's not good enough to pander to those people that would disagree with that in the community. It's time to be leaders. And you know what? When I'm out in my community in the Denison electorate and someone comes up to me and sometimes says the most awful things about asylum seekers, calls them all sorts of things, hardly the worst of which is illegals, and says, you know, they're all terrorists, they all should be sent back home. And I say to those people almost every time, I say, but hang on, do you agree that if anyone from anywhere in the world is genuinely fleeing for their life, that we should grab a hold of them and protect them and look after them? And without fail they say, of course we should. And then I turn the conversation around a bit more and I say, but that's what we're doing. That's all we're doing. When people come to this country by any means and they claim to be fleeing for their life, we should be giving them protection. Hear their claim. If their claim is accurate, and it most often is, then we should give them permanent refuge. We shouldn't send them off to places like Nauru or Manus Island or anywhere else. I mean, Nauru and Manus Island have become our modern-day hulks, like the hulks that used to be in the Thames for convicts. This is a blot on our country's name and our reputation. It will be a blot on our name forever. But we can start to turn it around. We can start to turn it around. It is a decent and a generous offer by the Government of New Zealand to resettle some of these men. Why can't government, you act like human beings, swallow your pride and say yes? It's not good enough, Minister, to hide behind that old government line, but we've got secret information which we can't share with you. We've got very, very secret information, and you've got to just trust us. That's what happened in 2003 when we went to war, because the government said, we've got very secret information. We can't share it with you. You've just got to trust us. Well, when it comes to asylum seeker policy, there is no trust left. The community does not trust the government. And I'm sorry, opposition, despite your good efforts today, when it comes to your broad policy, the community doesn't like that either. The fact is, most people in the community want Australia to start acting like a decent, law-abiding country, want us to give protection to people who are claiming to flee for their life. The broad community wants us to hear their claim. Sure, if their claim is fraudulent, then send them back. I'll say that again. If their claim is fraudulent, then send them back. But the fact is, Speaker, that most people who come to this country claiming to be fleeing for their life, or try to get to this country claiming to be fleeing for their life, are found to be genuine refugees. Most of the people on Manus Island at the moment, rotting up there, somewhere north of New Guinea, have been found to be genuine refugees. And the best plan the government can come up with is release them back into the local, or release them into the local community, or to rely on the promises of Donald Trump. Does anyone really think that the United States is going to accept over 1,000 asylum seekers from this country? Does anyone really think we can trust Donald Trump on this? Of course we can't. He just said what had to be said to get through a difficult moment. The fact is, there is no way, Deputy Speaker, the United States is going to take those people. But here we have on the table a repeated invitation from the Government of New Zealand saying they will take some of them. We should swallow, the government should swallow its pride and accept that offer. I make the point again. Politicians in this country need to stop pandering to the racism and the xenophobia that lurks in the darkest corners of our community. Stop pandering to that for votes. It's only a handful of votes, and as we've seen in the Queensland election, there weren't that many votes when Pauline Hanson went hard for them. There weren't that many votes. I say to the government and to the opposition, leave those votes alone and stop pandering to them. Start leading the community. Explain to the community the circumstances in source countries. Explain to the communities the circumstances in countries of first asylum. Explain to the community the forces at work, the difficulties in transit countries. Explain to the community why we need to start honouring international agreements like the Refugee Convention, why we need to start honouring international agreements like the Rome Statute, and we need to give protection to these unfortunate souls. And we can start with the hundreds of men on Manus Island. If you won't accept New Zealand's offer to resettle some of them, then bring them here. Bring them here now. Most of them have been found to be asylum seekers. It's not good enough, Deputy Speaker, through you to the Minister. It's simply not good enough. Have them rotting up there in half-finished facilities, many in fear of their life. It's not good enough to justify it by saying, as the government does, but we've got a secret, and you're just going to have to trust us that this is the best course of action, because it ain't the best course of action. Remember, Deputy Speaker, it's a crime against humanity to detain people indefinitely without trial. It's a crime against humanity to detain people in inhuman conditions. It's a crime against humanity to forcibly transfer someone to a third country. And we in this government is guilty of those crimes, guilty of crimes to humanity. Well, how about you start turning it around, through you, Deputy Speaker, to the Minister. Turn it around and accept New Zealand's generous offer.
The member's time has expired.